Imagine a mind so utterly devoid of empathy, so consumed by a singular, burning hatred, that its only pleasure was found in the suffering of others. A mind that meticulously cataloged its atrocities, not with regret, but with a chilling sense of accomplishment. This is not a character from a horror film, nor a figment of a disturbed imagination. This is the true story of Charles Carl Panzram, a name you may not know, but a story you will never forget. In 1928, locked away in the bowels of Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary, a guard, perhaps out of a flicker of curiosity or maybe a misguided sense of compassion, handed a pencil and paper to the most dangerous man he had ever known. What that man wrote was not a confession, but a manifesto, a declaration of war against all of humanity. He wrote, "I have no desire to reform myself. My only desire is to reform people who try to reform me. What creates such a monster? Is it born, or is it forged in the crucible of a cruel world?" Today, we descend into the abyss and confront the chilling legacy of a man who called himself the Architect of Annihilation. The story of Carl Panzram begins not in the shadowy alleys of a sprawling metropolis, but on a desolate farm in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, in 1891. Born to impoverished Prussian immigrants, his childhood was a mixture of neglect and hardship. His father, a man he barely knew, vanished when he was just 7 years old, leaving his mother to raise 7 children in a world that offered little in the way of comfort or hope. From a young age, Carl was an outcast, a boy with a simmering rage that would soon boil over. He later recalled, with a chilling lack of emotion, that by the age of 5, he was already a proficient liar and thief, growing meaner with each passing year. At the tender age of 11, after a string of petty crimes, Carl was cast into the unforgiving jaws of the Minnesota State Training School, a place that promised reform but delivered only torment. It was here, in the sterile, echoing halls of this so-called school, that the last vestiges of his innocence were brutally extinguished. He would later describe a place of systematic torture, a workshop the boys grimly referred to as the paint shop, where the walls were metaphorically painted with the blood and bruises of its young inmates. He was beaten, he was starved, he was violated in ways that would forever warp his perception of humanity. It was in this crucible of cruelty that he learned to hate, to despise, to see the world not as a place of potential, but as a battlefield where the only currency was pain. And it was here that a dark legend was born. Whispers among the inmates, later echoed in some accounts of his life, spoke of a 12-year-old boy who vanished within the walls of the school, a victim of Panzram's burgeoning rage. While the story remains unconfirmed, a ghost in the machine of his already horrific life, it serves as a chilling prelude to the carnage that would follow. In 1905, in a final act of defiance against the institution that had broken him, Carl Panzram burned the Minnesota State Training School to the ground. As the flames licked the night sky, they forged a new kind of monster, one who would spend the rest of his life making the world pay for the sins committed against him. Released from the confines of the reformatory, Panzram became a ghost in the machine of early 20th century America. He was a drifter, a phantom, shedding aliases like old skin, leaving a trail of petty crimes and escalating violence in his wake. From state to state, across borders into Mexico, and eventually across oceans to Europe and Africa, the pattern remained chillingly consistent: theft, violence, disappearance. He was a lone wolf, a predator who preferred the solitude of his own twisted mind, untethered by human connection. In 1920, a seemingly audacious act of burglary would set the stage for a new, even more terrifying chapter in Panzram's reign of terror. He broke into the stately New Haven, Connecticut, residence of none other than former U.S. President William Howard Taft. It wasn't just about the valuables. It was a deliberate act of defiance, a thumbing of his nose at the very system he despised. With the proceeds from this audacious heist, Panzram purchased a small sailing yacht, the Akista. What followed was an 8-year odyssey of unspeakable horror. The Akista became Panzram's mobile abattoir. In the murky waters of the Long Island Sound, Near City Island, Bronx, he would lure unsuspecting sailors from port bars onto his yacht. Promises of work, shelter, or companionship would quickly dissolve into a nightmare. He would drug them, rape them, and then, with a chilling detachment, shoot them with Taft's stolen pistol before dumping their bodies into the cold, unforgiving depths. He later claimed to have murdered 10 men in this manner, their disappearances swallowed by the vastness of the ocean, their fates unknown until Panzram himself, years later, meticulously detailed their demise. This horrific spree only ended when the Akista ran aground near Atlantic City, New Jersey, allowing 2 potential victims to escape into the night, forever haunted by their brush with pure evil. Panzram's depravity knew no geographical bounds. For a time, he worked as a labor overseer in Portuguese Angola, operating under yet another alias. What transpired there remains largely unrecorded by official history, but Panzram's own chilling accounts paint a grim picture. He claimed to have hired 6 local men for manual labor, only to lead them deep into the bush, shoot each one in the back, and leave their bodies for the scavenging animals. His motive? A perverse curiosity, a desire to see if he could simply get away with it. And, as he often did, he did. His hatred wasn't confined to individuals. It extended to the very fabric of society. In the early 1920s, in a shocking act of pure, unadulterated nihilism, Carl Panzram set an entire oil refinery ablaze in New Jersey. There was no political agenda, no financial gain, no grand scheme. He simply hated what it represented: industry, capitalism, the comfortable lives of others, while he felt chewed up and spat out by the system. The insurance company blamed faulty wiring. The truth, as Panzram later revealed, was far more terrifying. He burned it down because he wanted to watch the world burn. This was the true nature of Carl Panzram, a man driven by destruction for its own sake, a self-proclaimed architect of annihilation. For nearly 2 decades, Carl Panzram moved through the world like a shadow, leaving a trail of devastation in his wake, always one step ahead of the law. But even the most elusive predator eventually runs out of luck. In 1928, after a burglary in Washington, D.C., Panzram was finally identified and sentenced to a lengthy term at Leavenworth Federal Penitentiary. This time, something was different. Perhaps he sensed the end of his road, or perhaps, for the first time, he encountered a glimmer of humanity in the darkness. That glimmer came in the form of Henry Lesser, a young prison guard who, unlike all others, treated Panzram not as an animal, but as a human being. Lesser, intrigued by the notorious inmate, offered him a pencil and paper, asking him to tell his story. What emerged from Panzram's cell over the next several months was not merely a memoir, but a chilling, unfiltered manifesto of hate, a document that would become one of the darkest confessions in American history. In his own words, Panzram laid bare the twisted landscape of his mind. He described his crimes not as mistakes, but as deliberate choices, acts of power that made him feel alive. He wrote, with a terrifying clarity, "I don't believe in man, God, nor the devil. I hate the whole damn human race." He confessed to hundreds of sexual assaults, not for pleasure, he claimed, but as a weapon, a means of control, seeing no difference between physical violence and psychological terror. His philosophy was simple, brutal, and absolute: destruction for its own sake. He even boasted that if he had possessed more education or resources, he would have created explosives, planted bombs, and wiped out entire cities, not for a cause, but simply to watch the world burn. What makes Panzram's autobiography so profoundly disturbing is not just the sheer volume of his atrocities, but the chilling self-awareness with which he recounted them. He was not delusional. He was articulate, deliberate, a man who knew exactly what he was doing and felt no remorse. He rejected any notion of insanity, instead blaming society for shaping him into the monster he became. "I was no different than any other boy," he wrote, "but I was treated like an animal, and I became one." He was a storm, a force of nature unleashed upon the world, and he wanted no one, needed no one. His final, haunting words in the manuscript echo his life's philosophy: I have no desire to reform myself. My only desire is to reform people who try to reform me. Panzram's reign of terror found its ultimate conclusion within the very walls that were meant to contain him. In June 1929, a dispute with Robert Warnke, a prison laundry foreman known for bullying inmates, escalated into a final, fatal act of violence. Panzram bludgeoned Warnke to death with an iron bar, sealing his own fate. Sentenced to death, he refused all appeals, embracing his end with the same defiant contempt he had shown throughout his life. When offered a chance to repent by the prison chaplain, he spat in his face. And when asked for his last words on the gallows, Carl Panzram, the architect of annihilation, looked his executioner in the eye and uttered a final, chilling challenge. "Yes, hurry it up, you Huiya scum. I could kill 10 men while you're fooling around." On September 5th, 1930, Carl Panzram was executed by hanging, dying as he lived, defiant, angry, and utterly alone. His story, largely forgotten by history, is a stark and unsettling reminder of the darkness that can fester within the human soul. Why is he not as well known as other serial killers? Perhaps his brutality was too raw, his lack of remorse too absolute, his story too messy for any comfortable redemption arc. But his legacy, preserved in his own chilling words, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. What happens when a child is thrown away? When every institution is meant to protect, instead breaks? And how much of the monster we fear is, in fact, the monster we create? We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. What did you find most disturbing about Carl Panzram's story? Do you believe monsters are born or made? And if you found this journey into the abyss compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more explorations into the chilling realities of true crime and the human psyche. Thank you for watching.